Hello, hello, and welcome to part 3 of my top 50 albums of the 2010s. And welcome as well to the world of chaotic misery that is Swans, as we look at their 2014 masterpiece release, To Be Kind. It really is a whole world. This thing is over 2 hours long that you're just submerged into it. These huge, huge tracks, some stretching over 30 minutes long, build up such devastating energies and then toss you right back into the royal of noise, the maelstrom all around them. Sink or swim. There's a lot of pretty traditional rock elements on this album, and I'd say they're quite exquisite. That if you're in for just kind of good old guitar and drums, you're going to get something pretty amazing here. Really brilliantly performed, super dynamic, super engaging, really fresh, funky rhythms and kind of cool melodic transitions and stuff. It's everything you could want from a solid rock album. But there's a caveat though. It's not just that kind of rock album. And just when you're kind of getting your head around like, yeah, like I'm really feeling this, like this is really pumping me up, you're attacked. And there's suddenly just a brand new form of terror that submerges the track into this chaos, into this nightmarish sensibility. Things like the laughing, the screeching of guitar chords, this dissonant scraping that sometimes just tears through a track, and then sometimes the shocking silence, the dynamicism of these tracks when it goes quiet, when suddenly things cease. You're so paralyzed by anxiety that it hits even harder than the noise and the abrasion. The message of this album seems to be one of suffering, of the heaviness of life, and of life's inevitable end. Just that loss that permeates all kind of awareness and perspective taking. But the energy conveying this message proves it in and of itself, that you can explode free from these bonds, that you don't have to mope around, that you don't have to go softly into that light. You don't have to give in to the heaviness of life that has been thrust upon you. It's there inevitably, but you can rage against it. You can explode free of everything that has been piled upon you. And that there is so much potential too, that even though this life we have is finite and full of hardship and suffering, and that there may not be any transcendental peace or resolution or anything like that, that within life there is still so much potential. And here, sorry, this is a minor spoiler, but I think it's worth it to try to entice people into thinking that there might be something kind of satisfying or sublime lurking somewhere deep within these 2 hours. That the final line of the whole album is, "There are millions and millions of stars in your eyes." That just in that connection with another human being, just in looking into their eyes, you can see something more brilliant, full of more potential than millions and millions of stars out in space. So in the end, I think it is quite beautiful, even though this is delivered amongst a blitz of just explosive, annihilating sound, wave after wave after wave of it. My recommended tracks are A Little God in My Hands, one of the more kind of straightforward kind of bangers on this album, one that really drives home just what geniuses they are at composition and performance. Really motivating, a song that I feel, I remember riding my cousin's jet ski around our lake, the lake our cottage is on, and shouting the lyrics to this song, barely able to hear myself over the wind blowing past me, but somehow feeling so empowered by it. To Be Kind, the closing track, again, kind of spoilers to recommend hearing the closing track in isolation, but just hearing this moment where he sings, there are millions and millions of stars in your eyes, I think speaks to the great potential of this album. It can be quite motivating to get through, like a 40-minute piece on Haitian revolutionaries and things like that. The closing hits of Noise, the way each one transcends the last, going so far beyond Supernova out in just this amazing finish. I think everyone should experience it. Although I'm not going to go so far as to say that everyone will enjoy the totality of this album. Moving right along, we have one that probably nobody's heard of. This is the Nier tribute album Echo, put together by a variety of artists, all these Japanese electronic artists who were tasked to remake the soundtrack of this RPG released on the Xbox called Nier. This is not a game I have played, I'll admit it. I have not played Nier or Nier Automata. They have quite devoted cult fan bases. I don't know, I just haven't played it. But I had heard about this album because there is a big Virgin Babylon affiliation. Virgin Babylon is my favorite record label. It's run out of Japan by this artist World's End Girlfriend, who we talked about on a previous list. I like pretty much everything they put out. It's always quite unique, really interesting, really hits a lot of my musical sweet spots. So I absolutely had to listen to this to see so many of those artists coming together. Even though, as I said, I know I know basically nothing about this game. And I think not knowing the originals kind of makes this even more haunting, that I have to kind of come up with these stories myself. I have to sort of puzzle out how all these tracks fit together without actually knowing. That there's these lingering connections to things that have been forgotten or never known. The significance of them have been lost, but this kind of echo of their significance remains. And it's very evocative. Like, I really feel like, I have played the game. So I don't need to. No, probably it's just that I'm too lazy to play this very, very long, very, very sad JRPG that you have to beat multiple times to get the true ending. And I don't know, it's probably not going to happen. But I will keep listening to this album. It's diverse across every spectrum: liveliness, heaviness, progressiveness, ambientness. The full array of what these artists are capable of are showcased here. And yet it's unified, both in the motifs that the OST uses across tracks, things that are probably like the themes of the games, and most importantly, that magical Virgin Babylon sound, which I have a really hard time pinning down. There's some kind of common elements to it, like kind of an orchestral feel, but with kind of like a glitchiness, a mixture of really kind of like smooth sections with much more punctuated rhythmic sections, kind of distant, dreamy, ghostly vocals. These are things that often recur, but then there's Virgin Babylon artists that have none of these elements, that are in totally different genres. And yet I still find connections. I still can definitively recognize on the spot, oh, this must be signed to Virgin Babylon, this artist. I think this is one of the best ways to analyze what makes that sound so special, because it's isolated from their normal compositions. There's such difference between the different artists collaborating on this album that you start to pick out, like this is maybe what makes it work so well. This unique special ingredient that keeps getting added. There's a wonderful arc across this album that we start with kind of more boisterous music that then sublimates into pure beauty. And then at the end, which I'm sure is a remix of the final battle theme, complete apocalyptic annihilation raining down upon us. And it really feels like playing through a JRPG. I really feel like, I don't have to play it now. I've gotten the whole feeling just from listening to this album so much. But I don't know, again, probably lazy. But yeah, it's a really unique experience, I think, to try to feel out a game by listening to an album like this. So again, even if you've never played the game, even if you have no interest, I would recommend checking this album out. Really unique, really cool music. Oops, I think I should leave it up here. Yes, my recommended tracks are Keno Karu's The Wretched Automatons, This, if I had to guess, probably takes place in like a scene where you're having some sort of flashback or some sort of exposition, and it's just this really enchantingly beautiful flowing music with a really moving vocal piece over top of it that really blows me away, and just how emotional it is. And World's End Girlfriend, as I said before, the headmaster of this label, one of my favorite musicians, just period, who submits the closing track, Snow in Summer, the Dark Colossus Destroys All. This insane multi-movement symphonic boss battle apocalyptic feel that, although I think must be quite faithful to kind of the rhythms and the melodies of the original, is just overloaded and extremely saturated with like the World's End Girlfriend spice. A lot of his like signature sounds. He does this like this like guitar chord hit that he puts into a lot of his music, and it's usually kind of like a highlighting thing that it happens like right at the start of this big transition, or to kind of like highlight a motif that's going to show up. And near the end of this one, during like the biggest climax, it's just like bam, bam, like he just like spams it like 5 times in a row. So to World's End Girlfriend fans, it's like so mind blowing to have this thing that's usually kind of like doled out quite judiciously to just like oh, it's so good. It's such a crazy track. It keeps transcending itself in its chaos and power. Really, really amazing stuff. Okay. Next, at 28, we have the exact opposite of what I was talking about just now. A lonely phone booth out on a road. And this, of course, is Sun Kil Moon with universal themes. It feels like the cover is maybe just down the road a little bit from the cover of Benji, from that blurry wheat field. You stop and line up a shot of this phone booth. Feels a little more open, though, a little wider, that now we're kind of, we have a phone. And here Mark settles into the mode entirely that carries through all of his recent projects, where basically it's a song diary of recent events, the associations they carry in his mind, usually told in a very chronological order. And it's on the level of talking about like what media he's consuming, or how he slept the night before he was writing these lyrics. And this sort of really thorough documentation of one's life is super engrossing for me. I'm a serial journaler myself. I've been keeping a journal for over a decade now, where I record stuff like the media I consume, how I slept the night before, along with more substantial journaling projects of like trips I've taken and stuff. And I don't know, I find it so compelling that you can dive into the minutia of someone's life like this, that you can learn someone through the observances they have, the writing they've done about what's happening with them. And the way that he does it, I think, is the ideal form of diarying, where you free yourself, that every time you have an association, every time what you're writing makes you remember something else, you go down that path. You first explain the significance of this triggering that memory, and then you dive as deeply as you like into that memory, the memories that memory triggers. It's very fractal. I find this just so enchanting. Especially recently, I read all the works of Karl Ove Knausgaard, sorry, a Norwegian author who quite famously wrote this very long series of books just detailing episodes of his life. And he has the same sort of feeling, that he'll remember something, and then he'll start talking about that story, and then that will trigger some other memory, and it just kind of feels like falling into a dream. It's so enchanting and so engrossing and encapsulating. Just I don't know how to describe it. It's really special to me, though. And especially this sort of thing, and this is what Knausgaard doesn't lack, is these achingly beautiful transitions in his playing. This is mostly an album of just kind of acoustic guitar, but then it breaks into other modes sometimes to kind of highlight a shift in the mood of his stories. And the transitions between those two, especially when it kind of opens up again into that normal, just kind of flowing, soothing acoustic guitar are sometimes like it hurts. It's achingly beautiful. Some of the climactic moments, and here it's quite like on Benji, this kind of crystallization of memory. They're just too much. It's unspeakable. It almost feels brutal how thickly the nostalgia and that feeling of loss and distance piles on just one image that he recalls from like his youth. The contrast, yeah. The memory is so beautiful, so perfect, but then the distance between it and how he's feeling now and the time that's passed and what has been lost, it's simply incomprehensible. It's stuff at the very limit of like human emotion. You just can't like keep it in your mind, I guess. But then, on top of all of this is kind of the default mode of the album. But on a lot of tracks, he's like extremely petty. There's quite a substantial part that's just calling out his music critics and calling them whiners and talking about how they really haven't suffered much in life and making some really unflattering character portraits of them. There's a lot where he's just complaining about things that happened. He throws in these unnecessary details to kind of make himself look good in some situations. It's really kind of petty, often very conversational too. That it seems to imagine that he's not really writing a song as much as he's just kind of having a friendly chat with you and catching you up on a lot of things and throwing in details that, you know, if you're trying to make some sort of point, don't really lead to anything. And I'm not highlighting this stuff and saying like, oh, Mark Kozelek, such a genius. No one else writes like this. No one else has the genius to include this kind of pettiness in their characters. It's not like Joyce or something. It's not like you know, trying to bring out Leopold Bloom's flaws and the unreliability of his character and stuff. No. This is just how Mark Kozelek is. This is just the honest expression of his life. And it means almost more to me, that preciousness, if it is just honest and natural instead of like meticulously crafted. Just because it becomes such a unique artifact, this authentic journal of his life. I don't know. It's really wonderful to me, even though I'm not making it sound that good. This bitter old man complaining about everything. And I don't think, yeah, as I said, it's not so much that Mark is such a remarkable human being. Remarkable, I didn't notice that. It's that each and every one of us actually has this heavy complexity in our lives, that we're so loaded with memories and significance and these long patterns across decades. And that we also, too, are very petty and very small and hyper-focus in on perhaps the wrong things. That this is something that, you know, it's a universal theme. It reflects the human experience in a really authentic, unpretentious way. And more than any of the specific examples he gives, it's the fact that we all have our own examples in our lives of these types of stories, these types of memories, that makes it so powerful. My recommended tracks are The Possum, which was the first single released of it. This has an excellent example of the sort of transitions I'm talking about. It tells 2 or 3 different stories, and each time there's an accompanying just kind of release within the music. And it's so beautiful, so compelling. Even now, having heard this album many, many times, I'm taken aback by some of the big transitions. And with a sort of grace, I walked to the bathroom and cried. That should be cried, not cry, grammar typo, which is a much more kind of like black and white contrast, that it switches between kind of 2 modes throughout the song. But the end has some of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about these crystallized, beautiful moments of memory and just this aching feeling of loss that emerges as he thinks back to childhoods at the lake and thinking about the beautiful smile of a girl he knew there and how her daughters now smile in the same way and how, you know, that, I don't know, it's really beautiful. Okay. Moving on. At 27, we have A Moon-Shaped Pool by Radiohead. Now, I'm a pretty big Radiohead fan, so it might shock you to know, and this is a bit of spoilers, I guess. This is the only Radiohead project on this list. That's kind of surprising to me. In the 2000 lists, I'm pretty sure I would put five, five Radiohead records. I don't know. I mean, it's not like I've actually made the effort of making a 2000s list, but yeah, that's. I'm proud of myself because three others almost made this list. The King of Limbs, Muck by Atoms for Peace, and Tom's solo record, Tomorrow's Modern Boxes. All of those were in the like 51 to 100 range. So I'm proud of my restraint, is all I'm saying. That my Radiohead fandom isn't so much that I auto-include everything that Thom Yorke has even tapped his finger on. Still, though, this is, I think, in my mind, exactly what I want from a Radiohead album. And after a lot of these releases that I felt quite positively about, but weren't quite there, this was so satisfying that I'm like, yes, this is a Radiohead album. It's very rhythmically complex and melodically tense. The composition, I think, is marked by those two modes more than anything. With a wide variety of really expertly realized sounds from all over the musical spectrum. They really dip their toes into all sorts of genres and styles, but always with a sincere appreciation and really expert compositional skills. The lyrics range from the intense paranoia that characterized things earlier in Radiohead's career to more recent developments in Tom's lyrical work, which is more soft and sentimental. But always there's an occupation with loss. Loss, but on the other hand, also growth. And I think this is, in many ways, the most mature Radiohead album yet. It kind of feels like we're moving through therapy sessions with Tom. That he's making progress from previous albums. He's learning things. He's coming to terms with things. Of course, as he ages and he experiences more and more things kind of falling away from him, there's a more profound and deep sense of longing and loss, of course. But there's also the sense that he's more equipped than ever to deal with it, to make something beautiful from it, to fully realize it within himself. There's progress, but a deeper realization of what can't be changed. And reflecting in the compositional space, the ideas feel very complete. There's less of a sense of just experimentation because, you know, every Radiohead album has to be so different, and more a sense of fully realized ideas that have probably been incubating in the band for years and years now. So where do we go from here? There's been one Tom solo album since then, which I spoke about on the 2019 list. But it feels like, I actually don't quite remember what I mean by this, but the question is like the moon. I guess that it's always overhead, and maybe, you know, we can reach it. We've done it before. We can still make new Radiohead music, but that it's so distant and kind of magical now that we'll never really touch it the way... I don't know. I don't really remember what I was trying to say here. My recommended tracks, Daydreaming, one of the early singles that has a wonderful, wonderful music video of Tom just wandering from door to all sorts of different places. Feels like Yume Nikki, and just really gorgeous ambient music that I feel like, again, just the kind of maturity of ideas in it. But not just ambient because it would be cool if we had an ambient track, but something really special. And then Identikit, I think, is such an amazing representation of the sort of music that I feel only Radiohead can make. Just the tension in the beats, the slowly growing ghostly presence of Tom's vocals, this amazing kind of IDM-esque complexity to the rhythms and stuff, and just these irresolvable, anxiety-inducing melodies that at the same time feel so beautiful and transcendent. It's the Radiohead magic. I don't know how to express it. Next, we have The Life of Pablo by Kanye West. This was the strangest and most excruciating album release of my life. Are there other T-Lop veterans out there watching this? Other people that suffered along with me with delay after delay, name change after name change, watching that enticing notepad grow and grow and grow, watching the SNL performances. Kanye, live right now, KanyeWest.com, the listening party at Madison Square Gardens with only like low quality recordings and random other tracks getting played otherwise. Just chaos, complete chaos. At times I thought, it's never going to come out. And really, for me to talk about how excruciating this album release is, given that I spent most of my teens mashing F5 to refresh torrent sites, looping tiny leaked samples of Animal Collective tracks, waiting for things to get dumped or leaked early, it says a lot that this one was even more excruciating. It puts you, I think, going through this in the perfect manic state to listen to this album. Because this is a weird album. It's really jarring. The seams show everywhere. It's like he's trying to go for every single idea he had all at once. There's bonus tracks. There's patch notes. Remember that? After this album came out, it got updated like 5 or 6 times, and people would compile lists of changes. There's debate, oh, I like the album that came out this week. Oh, well, I like the version where this thing got switched, but this part, it's crazy. Other ideas, I'm sure, were just lost forever, even though it seemed like he pursued every single false start, every single whim he had. Other things seem to point to nothing. It's the perfect embodiment of that legendary notepad, which if you haven't seen, search like T-Lop notepad and you'll see it. That basically Kanye kept tweeting pictures of this notepad signed by everyone who came into the studio to work on the album. And it was like so hype. I mean, I can't think of many other artifacts that hyped me up for an upcoming album as much as that. Just to see all of these artists I loved signing their names, wondering like, what will they contribute? Will it be a verse? Will it be production? And then the frustration of finally listening to the final thing, and so many of those artists not even appearing. And you wonder, like, what did they do? Did it just not get used? Were they just like consulting? It's crazy, and the way the names and the doodles and everything just piles up on each other, the depth of it, the fractal nature of trying to comprehend what everything you see on there means. This is an overwhelming album, to be sure. There's another level of mimetic self-awareness that Kanye displays here. I realized something when Yeezus came out. I went to go see the concert of it. And there's a line on Yeezus that's quite famous, where he says, "In a French-ass restaurant, hurry up with my damn croissants." This was memed about endlessly. And when he performed that song, and everyone in the audience shouted, "Hurry up with my damn croissants," I felt like at this point Kanye must be absolutely sure of his power as a mimetic god, that he can just say something and then for years people will shout it back to him at concerts, people will put it in their Twitter bios, people will put it on the text of memes, people will sample it in juxtaposed contexts. And I feel like on T-Lop, this is when Kanye starts writing into it. It's not just that he thinks it's a funny line and then inevitably it becomes a meme, but that he writes the meme itself is the sense I started getting. And the number of memes this album generated, I think, is quite unprecedented. I remember in a previous review, I tried to list off every single meme I could think that this album spawned, and there's like dozens. Like it's crazy. So I think this never could have evolved, no matter how much work he put into it, into the kind of polished Kanye insta-classic that many of his previous albums are. The ideas are just too wild. They're just so all over the place. But there's flashes of brilliance in a lot of them, where you understand just why he searched so hard for that sound, why he put so much manic work into bringing out such a strange idea. You understand. I think in many ways this is Kanye's Smile. Here I'm referring, of course, to the legendary I almost said Beastie Boys, Beach Boys album that famously drove Brian Wilson kind of crazy. That he just was too ambitious. The ideas were just too complex, too ahead of their time. And the album never really saw the light of day. There was like the Smile Sessions, which were a collection of the recordings that actually were completed at the time. An amazing listen, by the way. Something that I actually debated including on this list because it did come out in the 2010s, even though all the music was recorded in the 60s. And they made like Smiley Smile, which was kind of like the compromise version, and Brian Wilson as a solo album eventually released Smile. But Smile, as it existed in Brian Wilson's mind, when he was driving himself so hard to create it, never really came to be. And I feel the same way, that there's no real true T-Lop, that even after all these updates, even after all these additions, what we're really hearing is just this fragmented vision of it, which is really compelling. And the music is still great, even though it probably doesn't live up to what Kanye wanted it to be. So, it's amazing to me, though, that we can look back at this just a mere 4 years ago and think of it as a period of relative stability for Kanye. My recommended tracks, it was hard to choose for this album. Ultralight Beam is a classic, is such a special and unique song that I really feel like everyone should experience it, even though it isn't too indicative of the rest of the album. But then again, what is indicative of the rest of the album? This album is all over the place. I kind of wanted to put Saint Pablo. That's definitely my favorite song on this album, and I think one of just the best things Kanye has ever made, ever. But I really feel like it should be appreciated in context, that you should only get to listen to it once you've heard the rest of it all together. So instead, I recommend Real Friends. I think it's a really, really beautiful song that Kanye expresses himself well on, that you can really get a sense of his state of mind. And it kind of hints at a lot of the other musical motifs that do their best to hold this album together. So yeah, check out those two. Check out the whole thing. I think this is a really underrated album. Next, we have Big Black Square. This could be dozens of different albums. Maybe it's Lupe Fiasco, maybe it's Jay-Z, but no, it is Dean Blunt's album Black Metal. So I was a big fan of his previous album, The Redeemer, and I was quite excited to listen to this one. And in the very first instant, the very first guitar chord, you realize that you're in a brand new aesthetic world. I think this is one of the most sonically enchanting albums on the whole list. It's kind of semi-pastiche renderings of like an old West acoustic guitar, I guess I would say. A lot of it is. You feel like you're way out there in some small desert town, driving from town to town on the highway, the big wide open sky. I don't know. It's it feels so evocative, and yet when you really try to pin down what's happening, it's a little more complex than you might realize just listening to it. So you have all of this old West guitar, but then really kind of clubby production too, like deep in a nightclub at 4 a.m., the sort of pounding, echoing beat that you feel. But then, just in case you were trying to figure it out and trying to come up with something sensible, there's a track called Country, which you would think would be the most countryistest of all, with the acoustic guitar and the lonesome lyrics. But no, it's just really messy noise, because haha, fuck you. So on top of all of this, we have Dean Blunt's disaffected spoken word lyrics that kind of drive you through most of the tracks, telling stories, putting you in a space of mind, such that the other elements can kind of be more loopy, more atmospheric. Are these small episodes in his life? Are these things that like happened to him? Is he relaying some specific set of people and events? Or is this just kind of images? Is this scenes from movies that don't exist? It's so cryptic. Even though a lot of the lyrics are kind of straightforward, they just leave out just enough information that you're like, where could this be? When could this have happened? There's some big, gigantic centerpiece tracks in the middle that really feel like either instrumentally or vocally he's just ruminating on something, some fixed idea that's just kind of looping in his brain, that the other tracks kind of feel like either a relief from or a despair that this rumination has plunged him into. So even though there isn't so much emotional coherence, even though you can't really figure out what's up with Dean Blunt, it resonates really deeply despite that. This is another theme we've seen a lot on this list. I find something so magical about not really knowing how I'm feeling, but feeling it so deeply anyways. Parts make me feel so wistful or so despairing. And I can't even really explain why. Like, I can talk about the composition, I can talk about how cool that is, I can talk about the lyrics, what I think they might mean, but there's something just indescribable on top of all of that that really resonates so deeply with me. My recommended tracks, Molly and Aquafina, just a really beautiful, spacey track. And then Grade, which is the finale track, which is way more bleak, way more brutal and despairing. I can remember walking around the Eaton Center in Toronto, and I don't remember like what I was doing there in the first place, like if I was meeting up with someone or if I was killing time before a bus or whatever. But listening to that and just feeling so sad, like so indescribably sad. I remember seeing the big fountain in the middle and just being like, I hate this. It's such a powerful track. Even though it's kind of spoilers for the album to listen to it in isolation, I think it's so uniquely powerful that everyone should check it out. Even if you're not going to commit to the whole thing and the messy noise and the 12-minute tracks and everything. Okay. Next, we have Channel Orange by Frank Ocean, going from all black to pretty much all orange. So, think about it. How does this album make any sense at all? How does this exist? The only way it makes any sense to me whatsoever, the only way it even begins to feel possible, is if Frank is the most well-connected veteran songwriter in the entire industry. Like, everything is so smooth, so expertly produced, so passionately engineered. Like, on the most minutia of song development, when you're just mastering and tweaking the smallest conceivable levels and like making sure the recordings and stuff are immaculate, there's passion in that on this album. Like this feels like someone with the industry's top experts at his beck and call. Everything is so inventive and bold. Nothing feels like a compromise. Nothing feels like he needs to try to make a name for himself. He needs to try to establish a sound. It's like he's been here for decades and he knows so much what works. He knows where he can go. It just feels like, yeah, like he's been doing this for an entire career. He recruited Andre 3000, who's like some sort of woodland hermit fairy creature now, to come in for an absolutely legendary show-stopping verse. How did he do that? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me, because this is just his second album. He was affiliated with Odd Future. He put out Nostalgia Ultra, which got some good critical response, but, you know, wasn't like a wildfire pop hit or anything. And then somehow he has the connections and the confidence and the resources to make this. It feels like a miracle. The only explanation is just Frank's talent and just kind of charm as a human being, reflected in his music, but I'm sure is representative of his actual personality too. Just allows him to make these connections, to build up a person around himself that is so impressive and so charismatic that everyone wants to work with, that even Andre 3000 is here. And as I said, this is so reflected in the music as well, that you find yourself being charmed in just the same way that these hypothetical studio engineers were. The stories he tells are extremely personal. they draw so evocatively from his most precious memories, the things that really stuck with him, that defined his life. But they bloom within all of us. We feel that love. We feel that alienation. We go to these places in Beverly Hills that we've never been to before. We meet these people that we'll never meet. And yet, hearing him, like, we're there. This is a good example. It's a silly example, but it's a good example. The album opens with the sound of the PlayStation booting up, and then the sounds of the Mortal Kombat menu theme. I don't even play that game. I've never been interested in Mortal Kombat, but I felt nostalgia. I felt the nostalgia that he feels hearing it, just in the way that it's sampled, just in the slight distance the microphone has from like the TV. I don't know. It's really something special. And probably, just of this entire genre, Frank Ocean, I think, just has my favorite voice. Just the sound of his voice alone is the most powerful, the most beautiful to me. This is saying a lot because, the strength of someone as a singer in this sort of genre is so important, is kind of the backbone of what makes the music good. And just nobody does it like Frank. My recommended tracks are Pyramids, which is, like, honestly, if this album was just Pyramids, if it was just the song Pyramids, it might still be on the list. That's how good it is. The beat switch on it is just one of my favorite moments in music, period. Like, yeah. And Pink Matter, where Andre 3000 comes out of his hermitage to deliver a amazing verse alongside just really smooth, really distant and dreamy, and yet so meaningful, so cryptic and ripe for study imagery flowing out of Frank. Really, really fantastic stuff. Next we have, whoa, no, I go down here. Angel, whoa, well, whatever. No, let's look at it. Angel's Pulse by Blood Orange. I really love this album cover. The more I see it, the more I like it. Just the way it's like two photos layered over each other, but like at first it just kind of looks like the one photo. All the little details of his life that emerge the more you look at it. It's fantastic. Anyways, we talked about this as well in the 2019 list. But I found that it's held up extremely well for me. And I think one of the reasons it's remained so enticing is because it's one of those albums where all the love you hold from it is somehow distilled in just the very first seconds of listening to it. As soon as I return to it, the opening beat, the way the first sung vocals come in, the bass line that starts at 22 seconds, I just grin and grin. Like, all of the memories flood back to me, all of the associations I have with it, all of the moments that I'm looking forward to hearing again, it kind of hits me just all at once. And I'm like, yeah, this is how it is. And I have no doubts that this will remain true for another 10 years, that this will keep being as special to me, that this will still make me grin every time I hear it. But I should say, this isn't a unilaterally happy album. Other parts are very heavy, very tragic, urgent, and distressed. And the whole experience feels really therapeutic. It's a very efficient introspective journey provoked by the album through yourself. And it's not just like, pumping you up and distracting you from the issues you're having, but it actually feels like you're moving through whatever's causing you anxiety, whatever's causing you dread. That the album acknowledges that, allows you to feel that, to have that moment, but then kind of brings you to a brighter place, to a place full of potential. It's really beautiful, and it's difficult to explain like why it works so well like this. It's very magical in that sense. Like, I don't know, it's just, everything comes together. I think it's a combination of just the inherent genius of Dev Hynes, who seems to have an absolute knack for just sound, for just making that sort of sound, and then a lot of hard work. And it's easy for that to go underappreciated because everything feels so smooth, so natural, so inevitable. But when you break down the choices made to develop this music, there's a lot going on. My recommended tracks, Dark and Handsome, one of the openers. Again, just so much encapsulated in every moment. Every moment is like a microcosm of the rest of the album. And Good For You, one of the ending tracks, it has this really driving, progressive feel that, as I said, really kind of takes you out of that more introspective space into a feeling of like, yeah, I can do it. I can do whatever I want. I'm a capable person. Very inspiring album for me. Then we have, I love this album cover so much. This, of course, is Earl Sweatshirt and his album Some Rap Songs. This, although, kind of a self-dismissive title of just Some Rap Songs, is in fact an entirely new style of poetic performance, I think. It's understated but emotional. It's both very dynamic and conversational. The rhythms emerge so naturally from it in this kind of conversational mode. It draws on poetic traditions well beyond rap, but then it also looks to the cutting edge of rap as a genre, looking to what people like Mike and Standing on the Corner, Navy Blue, that they're doing things that nobody else has done, and Earl, inspired by that, weaving this entire tapestry of various genres and poetic traditions history together, something absolutely brand new, something where even the ingredients might be things we haven't heard before. There's lots of short songs on these tracks, short songs on this album. They eschew your kind of verse, hook, verse expectations, more just one major poetic bloom in the most essential form, with no real pretense to like make it into a song, to add anything unnecessary to it, but that everything is in service of that poetic expression. The production is extremely varied. It's a real dense world of sounds and landscapes, often sample-based, sometimes kind of noisy, but there's always kind of an alluring quality to it that it feels like there's an image in mind that's just outside what you can picture that's being evoked by these sounds. And some of the moments on this album, like, and here again, it's a personal story of mine. When I was walking to work, that one of the tracks, kind of the beat came in just as the train was coming up over the hill that I was walking along. And even though I was walking to work, even though I didn't really want to go to work, even though, it felt like I was going to be stuck there for like 9 hours before anything interesting or enjoyable or meaningful would happen to me, in that moment, I really felt good. I really felt like there was so much potential in the world and potential within myself to make meaning even of that, to gain something even from another kind of dull day of work. It was indescribably wonderful. It was, well, I tried to describe it just now, but part of it, though, is beyond the description I can give. The story, and I think maybe this is why this moment hit me so hard, is the messages of the album are very much about emerging from depression into this world of fulfillment and growth. And not just casting aside your time depressed, not just saying, well, that was a waste, and I'm going to change everything about my lifestyle and be okay now. Nothing that trivial, nothing that cheap, but embracing it as necessary for this development, as being the foundation of the person that you will become in a positive way. That it was all necessary, perhaps, for you to enrich yourself in the ways that you have been. And this attitude, I think, is reflected in the sound itself, of course in the lyrics, but just in that kind of development and bloom in the production, in the samples building up upon themselves. It's really, really wonderful. And as someone who's followed Earl's career quite closely, to have an album like this where he's saying things about how excited he is to engage with the world and being so emboldened and empowered by this entirely new poetic style that he's developed, to see that emerge after albums like I Don't Like Shit, I Don't Go Outside, or Soulless, which are just so bleak, so hopeless, so sad. It's really inspiring and really just, I don't know, reassuring. Like, you feel so good for Earl that he's in this place now. My recommended tracks are Nowhere to Go, which was the first single. And although the message of Nowhere to Go seems kind of bleak, in the cover art where Earl is wearing a chain with a noose on it, seems like he's still kind of trapped in those depressive cycles. This really showcases his new attitude towards that kind of heaviness of life, which is so much more inspirational, so much more empowered. And then On the Way, this was the track I heard when I was walking up over the hill. So try to set up such a situation in your own your own listening experience. Like, I don't know, listen to it, and when the beat starts coming in, look out the window. You'll go, ah, maybe the world is a beautiful place after all. Yay. All right, for our final album on this segment, we are going to look at Young Thug's 1017 Thug. I just noticed this. Back when this album came out, he didn't have the O in his name. It almost looks like a real rapper name now. I don't know, something about the fact that he named himself Young Thug, the most generic thing I can imagine, and yet his music is so explosively experimental and unique and bold and just him. The fact that he was young, I could go on and on and on about this, and about how the other name changes he has is built into that, and the fact that Lil Baby and Gunna, his two most successful proteges, seem to have like inherited each one half of his name. I don't know. It doesn't matter. What matters is this album. This album matters a lot. If we're thinking about in terms of the influence that these albums have had on the genres they emerged in, this is definitely one of the most important on this list. This was the chrysalis of a brand new era in hip hop. Something so colorful and enticing and many faceted. Everything was just loaded with this huge potential that so many rappers, dozens and dozens of rappers, looked at this mixtape and were like, oh, we can do that if we want. I can rap like that if I want. And not just I can rap like that, but this proves I can rap however I like. The potential space opened up by this is cannot be overstated. I think every single one of the 20 tracks on this are just packed with little special things, with signature touches that only Young Thug can do. There's hilarious lines, flows that just leave you staggering, super, super catchy hooks that you feel like this guy should be way more popular than he was at the time. That you knew he was just inevitably going to blow up if you can write hooks that catchy. Just entirely new aesthetic spaces in the lyrics. Even though the lyrics seem at first to be the same kind of generic stuff that all trap hip hop is about, you gotta think, who was doing it like this before Thugger though? Who was coming up with such novel imagery, comparing their diamonds to Pikachu, things like that? It's so refreshingly new. There's a perfect interplay on this with other more traditional rappers. At this point, Young Thug didn't have the clout to be getting big names, but Gucci Mane proving himself just the fantastic booster of new talent in the Atlanta scene, appearing on like 4 or 5 tracks, I think, kind of showcasing this contrast that he's a much more traditional kind of previous generation rapper, and showcasing how Young Thug's entirely new style can like fit in with that, and how they enhance each other. And at this point, Thugger had everything to prove. You know, he only had his voice. There were no major cosigns outside of like Gucci Mane and other Atlanta talent. There wasn't this like famous persona that had been developed through so many interviews and inexplicable videos and his fashion sense and everything. People didn't know who he was. Everything had to be conveyed and proven through the rapping itself. And it's almost frustrating to listen to this now, because the rapping is so good, so high effort, so much had to be staked based on just that. He went in so many different directions on this. proving himself just over the course of one track to be a master of a style that he himself invented, and then like abandoned. That it felt like after this, he didn't need to do any of that stuff again because he had done it once. Jeffrey is truly untamable. And although it's kind of frustrating because, you know, I want like 500 songs that sound like Tabernacle, but what we get instead is cool too. And what this makes me think of was a Zach Fox video I saw recently where he was being interviewed by a genius about some upcoming rappers. And he talks about the great breakings of hip hop, moments where hip hop as we knew it was shattered into 1,000 pieces, and the number of ways those pieces could be put back together just vastly exceeds anything we thought possible in the genre. It feels like it's opening up like a big bang. And this is definitely one of those moments that after this, just a whole order of magnitude new things were possible. My recommended tracks, Pikachu, the misspelling is Thugger's Own, a track that I think was my first actual introduction to Young Thug. I remember my friend saying, like, have you heard this? This is kind of something special. And it's still catchy. It still holds up. It's still such a fun idea that his diamonds say Pikachu because they're that bright, they're that sparkling, that it's like Pikachu's electricity. That in there is the encapsulation of the unique mind of Young Thug. And Nigeria, a Gucci Mane feature with a really funny, hilarious hook where he's talking about how he gets his weed from Jamaica and Nigeria and stuff. And then he says, I go to Siberia, which feels like he includes it just because it rhymes with Nigeria. And he goes, it's so cold in Siberia. So it has this like this kind of mystique that it's like, did Young Thug go to Siberia because it rhymes with Nigeria? And then he gets there and he recognizes it's so cold in Siberia. But like, no, like clearly it's just kind of a joke. But it's such an inexplicable sort of humor. Like it's so it's so self-aware and yet so like innocent and separated from traditional kind of like jokes in hip hop. I don't know. Something about him going, it's so cold in Siberia, will just always stick with me. And this mixtape is full of jokes like that. Really fantastic mixtape. Something that I think the landscape of hip hop would be unrecognizably different if this didn't exist. And yeah, happy to put it at the number 21 spot. So after this, we only have 2 more videos left. We're finally getting to the end after hours and hours of talking about music. As a little enticing preview of the next album, I leave you with this.